Welcome to our third panel of the day, the first panel of the afternoon. I'm very pleased to have one of Wharton's own faculty here to moderate this panel, which will be on combining attribution modeling approaches with experiments of different kinds, natural experiments, controlled experiments, all sorts of good stuff. So Kartik Hosanagar, who's a professor here of information systems, will be moderating the panel, and I'll leave it to Kartik. We were very delighted to get Kartik, but he has to leave on an international trip, so I'll be taking over for the Q&A. So without further ado, Kartik.
Thanks, Ellie. It's great to be here. So we have a really nice session. I'm going to start off by briefly introducing the panelists and then the papers, and then pretty much they're going to take over. So we have today Nadia Abou, who from the Goethe University, and she's going to be talking about looking at synergies between sponsored search and organic search. Next to Nadia is Bernd, her colleague at the university and also co-author on the paper. Next, we have Anindya Ghose from NYU, and then we have Bryan Bollinger from NYU as well. And finally, we have Vaman Kudpi from GFK Research. So our session today, as Ellie mentioned, is essentially focused on looking at combining experimental and non-experimental data. One of the big questions that comes up in any data-driven research is what we in academia call identification, which is how do you tease out the direction of an effect, how do you tease out causal versus correlational effects, and so on. For example, if we're trying to figure out the return on investment in advertising, we can show a bunch of ads to consumers, watch them for the next few weeks, measure purchases made, and then try and compute return on investment based on these purchases and what you spent. But the problem is, of course, how do you determine whether they might, whether they would have bought the product anyway in the absence of advertising? Or how do you determine whether the purchases were driven by other simultaneous events that overlapped with the advertising? For example, let's say holiday shopping, and you ended up increasing the ad dollars during the holiday period. And experiments are a powerful technique to address this, as we saw in the first session. And in this session, we'll look at a few papers that are using experimental data in interesting ways. Our first paper is, the presenter is Nadia, and she's going to be talking about using a field experiment to analyze the profitability of branded keywords in paid search. Now, branded keywords are keywords like American Express. So Amex might bid on the keyword American Express on Google, and a consumer may click on the ad, go to the website, and sign up for a credit card. But the obvious question is, did they even need to bid on this keyword? Because maybe the consumer, if they bother to type in American Express, they might anyway click on the organic results. So any purchases generated through sponsored search for these kinds of branded keywords, are they really incremental purchases, or are they cannibalizing what would have occurred otherwise through organic search? So that's going to be the focus of the first paper. The second paper, which Anindya Ghose will present, is on analyzing the interdependence between web and mobile advertisements. So he's going to look at the combination of web and mobile advertising as opposed to pure web advertising, and look at whether advertising in mobile devices is generating incremental sales, or is it merely an issue of moving purchases from one channel to the other. And he's going to look at data from a field experiment, and he'll combine it with archival data for the same firm. And finally, Bryan is going to talk about advertising on TV, and he's going to look at within serial commercials and between serial commercials, and look at whether and to what extent do these commercials take users away from the content to which these ads or commercials are attached. So he's going to use a natural experiment where within serial commercials were banned in China, and exploit that natural experiment to answer his question. Now, of course, there's the use of experimental data, but another interesting thread that ties these papers together is that they're all focused on synergies and cannibalization issues in advertising. So Nadia and Bernd are looking at cannibalization in the sense that sponsored search might be taking away clicks and purchases that you would have anyway obtained through organic search. Anindya is going to look at synergies between web and mobile advertising. And Bryan is finally going to look at whether or not commercials in TV are going to take viewers away from the content to which they're attached. So there's a thematic connection as well. So without further ado, I'll let Nadia take over, and she's going to present her field experiment in sponsored search.
Thanks so much for the nice introduction, Kartik. He already explained actually what we are doing. What we are looking at is branded keywords, as he said, and whether branded keywords or actually brand bidding really cannibalize or really increase profit. So let's assume you're that guy over there, Cladder, and you're looking, as Kartik said, for a credit card, and you're just typing into Google American Express. And what happens is you'll get two types of results. The first one is the organic search result, which is actually driven by the algorithm that Google has. And if Cladder clicks on that link, then Amex doesn't have to pay anything for that click. However, the result above is actually the costly paid link. And if Cladder is going to click on that one, then Amex obviously has to pay a cost per click to Google, which is determined in an auction. But that's actually, I'll keep that out of the explanation now, but that's how it actually happens. So now actually what Cladder does, he's clicking on the costly paid link. And that's what we call brand bidding, and according to our estimates, which are derived from also archival data, the worldwide brand bidding market should be at least, that's a quite conservative estimate, at least kind of $500 million worldwide. So just to show you that it's actually not a very small problem in a domain like search engine advertising, which is also a small domain in online advertising, but it's quite a relevant problem actually for companies. And companies usually also do not agree on the profitability of brand bidding, because when you analyze in a brand's best global brands and just type in their brand names into Google, 40% of them actually do brand bidding, and the rest doesn't do brand bidding. So there's actually not really agreement around that question around there. So what Kartik already said, the real question is, would Cladder have clicked the organic link if the paid search link was never present, really? So if the answer to that question was yes, then that would actually mean that the clicks and the conversions are really, that Cladder generated, are really just cannibalized from organic search, which is free compared to the paid search channel, which is actually costly for the advertiser. And if the answer was no, then the click is really incremental, and in that case, paid search really adds value as a channel itself. So the aims of our projects are actually the following. First of all, we would like to explore the conditions under which brand bidding increases the profit of the advertiser, and we would like to develop better metrics to account for this potential cannibalization that can go on in paid search. And eventually, we're measuring in a field experiment, as Kartik said, the cannibalization in paid search and how it eventually impacts profit of the advertiser. So first of all, that's a chart that shows which potential scenarios might happen if you add paid search to organic search. First of all, what might happen is paid search might decrease the success of organic search in the sense that it takes away clicks and conversions from that channel. As I said, that was the example with Cladder. But this cannibalization scenario might actually have two different outcomes. If you have low cannibalization, so not too many clicks and not too many conversions are cannibalized, and paid search is really adding some incremental clicks and conversions, in that case, this low cannibalization might actually be profitable for the advertiser. In the other case, if you have too many clicks and conversions being cannibalized, then really paid search is not profitable to turn on if you look at the incremental profit that it generates. Then there are two other scenarios which might not be as likely, but I've also seen some of these scenarios out there. The second one is actually the zero cannibalization scenario, where paid search doesn't have an impact on organic search. And the last one is where paid search really increases the profitability or the success of organic search. And that might happen maybe because if you have a double entry, that might increase the trust of the consumer. And maybe products that are really sensitive to trust, they might benefit from such a double entry. So if we're looking at the two cannibalization scenarios, what you see here is the number of clicks. That's just a numerical example. In the first case, for low cannibalization, the number of clicks goes down from 100 to 80, and you have 30 paid clicks being generated. Now, usually what happens is you'll have a manager that is managing the organic search channel alone, and a campaign manager that is managing the search engine advertising channel alone. And if they don't interact, they wouldn't know that actually paid search cannibalized 20 of those clicks, and really the added value of paid search is actually only 10 clicks that it really generated truly. In the high cannibalization, this is even worse. So in that case, the clicks of organic search go down to 30, and paid search is really cannibalizing 70 of the clicks in that scenario. So in that case, you see having a look at the channels in isolation would really lead the managers, and especially the paid search campaign manager, to draw a wrong conclusion about the profitability and the performance of its channel. So what happens in these two scenarios is actually that you might underestimate the costs. I'll show you why in a second, and you might overestimate the incremental profit that paid search generates. Now, what we suggest is the following. Usually, if you calculate costs per click and costs per order are usually the acquisition costs per customer that I have. And usually, you calculate the cost per click by having your budget, dividing by all the clicks that you get for paid search. And that's actually not quite right. You should actually, going back to that slide, you should actually take out all those red guys over there, because I would have got them for free anyways, and I wouldn't have to pay for them if paid search wasn't there. So actually, I should calculate something like a cost per incremental click. And that's also true for the cost per order. Cost per order is actually the wrong measure to look at, because you should take out all those guys that are cannibalized and really only look at the incremental conversions that are generated by the channel. Especially if you would like to compare costs per order across channels, if you only calculate the normal cost per order, that would lead you to the conclusion that paid search and especially branded keywords are very, very good in terms of their CPO. But actually, if you look at the cost per incremental order, so the corrected measure, that might look quite different. So in that case, for the numerical example that I had, having a cost per click of €1.50 for low cannibalization, taking account of the cannibalization going on there would actually lead you to the conclusion that the cost per incremental click is really €4.50. And in the second case of high cannibalization, you would really have a cost per incremental click of €12. So of course, these numbers are a bit high, but just to show you what could happen if you don't take that into account. So what we've done now is we've set up a quite clean field experiment. That was at the times where in Germany, competitors weren't allowed to bid on the brand name of their competitors or other companies. So we definitely know that the company, which was a travel advertiser actually, they were selling bus tickets online. So that's actually a product that is purchased probably quite quickly. It doesn't have a too long customer journey. We definitely knew that the advertiser was at the top of the paid search results and at the top of the organic search results. What we had was actually 24 branded keywords. They somehow related to the brand name of the advertiser in combination with some other words. And we had 3 replications of each experimental group, actually. So overall, an observation period of 12 weeks. And every 2 weeks, we switched paid search on and off. Now, of course, seasonality might take place, but we actually corrected for seasonality using Google Trends data, because there you can actually follow how strongly impressions and searches vary. So that's taken account of as well. And the results actually look as follows. We have about 40,000 clicks for organic search without brand bidding. These go down to about 27,000 clicks if you turn on paid search. And paid search really generates overall about 26,000 clicks. That's what an isolated view would suggest. However, actually half of those clicks were really cannibalized from organic search. I would have gotten them without the paid search channel anyways. So that actually results, the cost per click was assumed or reported to be 5 cents. But if you take account of the cannibalization, that it's really actually 10 cents, so double the number that you thought it is. If you look at the conversion, that looks not so bad as with the number of clicks. So we had about 1,000 conversions over there. They went down to 750 in the organic search channel. And actually of the about, let's say, 700 or about 800 paid search clicks, about 250 were actually cannibalized. And if you look at the profits at the end of the day, the organic search profit went down from about 9,000 to about 7,000. And actually 2,200 euros were cannibalized. And the real contribution of paid search, the real profit that it generated was really only 3,500. And the advertiser, if he just looks at the paid search channel alone, as it's usually done, he would have thought the profit for paid search is about 5,600, I guess, yeah. And actually the CPO, as you see over there, is actually also quite high compared to the cost per incremental order is actually quite high compared to the cost per order. So what you learn from this field experiment, the brand bidding is actually profitable in that empirical study. It probably doesn't have to be for other advertisers. It depends probably on the industry. But what you definitely see is that if you look at a channel in isolation and you don't do such field experiments, then you would definitely come up with wrong conclusions about the profitability of the paid search channel. And if you're like a manager that is managing different channels at the same time and has to decide where to put its budget, if he knows, for example, its profit contribution exactly, and he compares the CPO of different channels, probably he would have thought that this is a very profitable channel, but you should actually correct for this kind of cannibalization and then compare the CPOs across the different channels. So that's the main managerial implications that we have for brand bidding and paid versus organic search. Thanks.
Thank you, Nadia. Next, we'll have Anindya Ghose present about interdependence between web and mobile advertising.
All right, first, thank you to Eric, Pete, and Ellie for having our paper in the conference. So this is joint work with Sang-Pil Han, who's at City University of Hong Kong, and Sung-Yu Park, who's also at NYU. So, so as Kartik mentioned, sort of the basic motivation for this paper is to look at potential interdependencies between web and mobile. And you know, what sort of made us think about this project was, if you think about the way we are being bombarded by ads, you know, when you're walking on the streets, you get to see you get exposed to billboard ads. When you're searching for something, you get exposed to paid search ads, as Nadia talked about. When you're on a mobile phone, you get display ads. Sometimes if you're in an app, you also get to see an ad within an app. So there are lots of ads out there through different channels, and what we're looking for are potential interaction effects between you know, these channels, right? So And the reason also why this becomes interesting is because of what we now know as the second screen effect or the multi-screen effect, where some people are starting to search using a mobile phone, and then they go on and make the purchase on a PC. Or some other people, they might start a search on a PC first, and then they go ahead and make the conversion on a mobile phone. And so we are getting used to using more than one device to complete a single transaction. And so that kind of behavior, the second screen, the multi-screen behavior, starts raising questions about what does it mean for advertisers, right? So if I'm an advertiser, if I'm a marketer, I'm already pumping in ads on the internet. Should I also pump in ads on the mobile channel? And if so, how much? How should I allocate my budget? What are the potential effects going on here? So the basic question we are looking at in this project is simple, which is, let's say I'm surfing on, most of you probably recognize this famous viral video by Sai, right? So if you've been watching this video, you would see that sometimes you get exposed to ads from hotels. The travel industry really benefited from Sai's video for various reasons. But when you go back and when you're commuting back from work to home or from home to work, and you're surfing on your tablet or a mobile phone, and you're trying to replay that song, again, you might get exposed to the same ad once again, right? And so the question we're looking at is, if people get exposed to the same ad on more than one device, in this case, the web and mobile, how does that affect our purchase propensity? What does what does it do to clicks? What does it do to conversions, more importantly? And then what happens to net sales, right? So, and sort of, social psychologists have predicted that, there are two countervailing theories here. One is that when people get exposed to too many ads, they get annoyed. There's an annoyance effect, and that leads to potentially avoiding of any sort of purchase behavior. On the other hand, there's also what we call the reinforcement effect, that if you see the same ad more than once, if you see it once on the internet, once on the mobile channel, maybe it sort of triggers in you this reinforcement effect that this is a high-quality brand or a popular brand, and that might lead to more purchases, right? So empirically, we don't know what the answer is, which is why we go ahead and we find this question interesting. Now, obviously, if you want to answer this question, there are a lot of econometric issues that come up, and Garrett in the morning talked a lot about some of them, causation, selection issue, and so on. So what we do is we are essentially looking at trying to figure out whether if you're the mobile ad budget manager, right? So you got $1,000 to spend. If you take the first approach that mobile ads only influence purchases on the mobile channel, then again, we are missing out a part of the puzzle here, because what happens is oftentimes people get exposed to the ad on the mobile channel but end up buying the product on the web channel, and vice versa. So people see the ad on web and end up buying it on the mobile channel. And so there are these important spillover effects and interaction effects that we have in the second box over there. And what we're trying to do is measure those effects in a causal manner, which is why we resort to a randomized field experiment, right? So I'll walk you, what we do in this paper is a combination of a randomized field experiment, and then we try to generalize some of the findings by looking at a massive observational data set that has 32 billion impressions of a variety of different products from different retailers. But the core of the paper really, when addressing causality, is more about the field experiment, which involves just one product, and I'll talk about how we went about designing that. So this is basically a digital products seller. These guys sell e-books, for example. This is the largest one in South Korea, and in terms of revenues, they are the top 3 in the Asia-Pacific region. So what we do is we run a field experiment over a 6-week period where we take a sample of 30 digital books, randomly selected. And essentially what we are doing is we are alternating between the web and mobile ads by turning off ads on one channel and turning on the other channel, and so on and so forth, right? So it has a similar flavor to what Bernd and Nadia did, except that this is between web and mobile. And so in more details, this is an example of the landing page of this particular retailer, and that box that you see over there, there are 10 slots for various sorts of books. And essentially, what the retailer can do is show ads for any number of books in those slots over there, right? And so what we do is we basically manipulate the availability of these advertised digital books on the internet side for this company, and on the mobile optimized side too. And then we look at how people switch channels, where are they buying from, and so on. So specifically what we do is, over a 6-week period, we have essentially, think of this as like a cohort of 4 possible options. In time period 1, we only allow the ads to appear on the web channel. In time period 2, we allow the ads to be on both the web and mobile optimized site. In time period 3, we allow the ads to appear only on the mobile optimized site, and then we shut off ads from both web and mobile in period 4. And then we alternate the sequence, because as you can imagine, there are a number of interesting issues that people may have. People may care about ordering effects, so we did a number of different combinations, switching the order. For example, on the right-hand side, in time period 1, we start off with the mobile ads. Then we completely pause both web and mobile ads in week 2. And then we pulsate the web ads, and then go on to having both web and mobile ads at the same time, right? So, and so essentially what this starts to give us is some interesting insights as to how people behave when they get exposed to the same ad on multiple channels, right? So what I'll present today is essentially the aggregate product level analysis. You can still do some more interesting individual level analysis, and I'll share some of that if you have the time, but I'll focus on the aggregate level stuff for today. So here's what we find. So in terms of click-through rates on these ads, essentially, if you look at the 2 bars, so the week when only web ads were on versus the weeks where both web and mobile were on, so you see a non-trivial increase in clicks from, by about 34%. Similarly, when we look at the mobile channel, again, when we only have mobile ads versus the weeks when we have both mobile and web, there's an increase in click-through rates on mobile ads as well, right? But more interestingly, is probably the conversion rate. So in terms of conversion rate is defined as conditional on click, how many people went ahead and bought the product. So again, when you compare the web channel with the web and mobile channel, so again, ads are switched on in both channels for a certain time period, and we compare that with conversion rates when the ads are only present on the web channel, there is a jump in the actual sales or conversion rates on the web channel compared to when it's not. With mobile, however, there's an interesting insight, which is that it turns out that when the ads are switched on in both web and mobile compared to when only mobile ads are present, we actually see a small drop in conversion rates. And when we went ahead, and what we are doing now is looking at the individual level user data to see what's going on. And one of the things that we are seeing is a lot of people are seeing the ads on their mobile phone or the smartphone, but when they actually have to buy the product, they're using the larger screen, the PC or the laptop to buy it, okay? And so if I was thinking about this in a myopic fashion, I would probably say mobile ads are not working, but that's not true. Mobile ads are working, and in fact, they're pretty effective in assisting the final conversion. So it somewhat relates to the attribution issue that the previous panel talked about, that if you miss out on the channels that are assisting the final conversion, then you miss out on part of the story. So mobile ads are playing an important role from that perspective. Total sales, the good news for the marketers is that total sales are going up. So even though there's an increase in conversion rates on web and a slight drop in mobile, the net sales are actually going up. And they go up a lot more on, compared to the web. What you see is this is basically, think about this, for every $1,000 unit of revenue, when both web and mobile ads are present, there's almost a twofold increase in total sales. And for mobile, it's not that, comparatively it's less. For every $1,000 sold through mobile, but when both web and mobile are triggered on, there's about 50% increase in actual revenues for that channel, right? So again, net positive increase in revenues when both web and mobile ads are on. So the cross-channel conversion rates, as you expect, the off-diagonals are pretty high, which means that people looking at ads in one channel and buying through that same channel, 95% for the web, about 88% for mobile. But there's a very important and non-trivial cross-channel interdependence, which means that a lot of people, or some people, are seeing the ads on the internet, but buying it on the smartphones, and some people are seeing the ads on the smartphone and buying it off the internet, right? And so there's a lot. What is interesting is that the number of people seeing the ads on mobile phone and then buying off the internet, that's about 2.7 times higher. So which is, again, intuitive. You'd expect that even in today's world, we see more people using the larger screens to buy, eventually buy the product compared to these smartphones and so on. So the one potential drawback with this experiment is, it's randomized, so that's nice, but it's only one product category. So what we did next is we went ahead and collected a pretty massive archival data that covers about 6 to 7 different product categories, such as apparels, cosmetics, travel, entertainment, telecom services, and the ebooks themselves. This data was put together by a team of people from ad networks working with the individual advertisers and retailers who had that conversion data. So this was a pretty massive effort in terms of pulling in a number of people. So we were very fortunate to get this data. It has about 150 mobile campaigns and about 1,000 plus web ad campaigns, which leads to about 1.3 billion impressions on the mobile phone and about 4.3 million click-throughs on mobile phone and about 32 billion impressions on and 48.6 million click-throughs for web ads. Right? And again, the whole purpose of this archival data was to figure out, what we see from the ebooks was that, was it an outlier? There's some product-specific effects that's driving those results, and that was the core purpose of this particular exercise. So I won't go through the model in detail, but essentially we have a hierarchical Bayesian model, and we are essentially estimating 4 different consumer-level equations, starting with exposures to ads and how we react to ads, captured by click-through rates. The acronym is CTR. So we're looking at click-through rates on the web channel, click-through rates on the mobile channel, conversion rates on the web, conversion rates on the mobile channel, the error terms are correlated with a multivariate normal distribution because these are not independent behavioral level processes. So bottom line is, here's what we see with click-throughs again. So as you can see, the same channel click-through tends to be positive. The cross-channel click-through also, the marginal effect is positive. It's twice, for the web channel, it's twice that of the mobile channel. Again, that sort of makes sense that there are more people reacting positively to ad exposures on the internet as opposed to the web. When it comes to conversions, the same channel effects for conversions again tend to be positive, so people who are seeing the ad on mobile and buying on the mobile channel. But as we saw with the field experiment, the cross-channel effect for the mobile conversion rate is again negative. Right? So while the marginal effect for the web channel tends to be positive, what we still see is that some people tend to be seeing the ads on the smartphone, but when it comes to actually doling out the dough and buying the product, they're still using the larger device. Okay? So, so that's essentially what we do in this experiment. We are looking at same channel and cross-channel effects between the web and mobile. And this is again a more aggregate product level analysis. What we also have now is the individual customer level analysis, which is what we are trying to disentangle. This interesting insight about what's driving people to buy the final product on the larger screen. Is it just screen size, ease of convenience, ease of purchase? There's something else that's probably going on. The other thing we are also doing is, this came from a bunch of the advertisers and marketers we worked with, where they said that, can this experiment / model help us look at questions like, how do I allocate my budget between these 2 channels, right? So let's say I have $1,000 to spend, and I'm trying to figure out how much do I put on web and how much do I put on mobile, right? In sort of simplistic world. So we've done a number of calibration exercises using our models and simulations to come up with numbers that if you're spending so much on the web, a condition on your budget, this is how much you should spend on the mobile. We can also back out how much should you be willing to pay for a cost per click on each channel, condition on your budget, condition on the price that's being imposed on you by advertising networks, and cost per impressions. So again, there's a bunch of stuff you can do here with to back out how to appropriately allocate your budget between these two channels. And so this is essentially, there's going to be one or two follow-up projects where we, come up with models that predict some of these numbers. So the last thing I want to say is, following this project, we've also run another randomized field experiment where instead of ads, we are looking at effectiveness of coupons. And sort of the question here is, if people get mobile coupons, right? So, and this is all sort of targeted, geo-targeted to the extent possible based as a function of how far you're from the nearest store. So what we've done is we've done a randomized experiment where we're essentially trying to disentangle that how much of a discount on a coupon should I give you if you are X feet away from my nearest store, right? So if you're Starbucks and you can sense using the consumer's app that the user is about 20 feet away, should you give him or her a 10% discount compared to a user who's 50 feet away, in which case you might have to give a higher discount. And so there's this interesting trade-offs between distance and the face value of the coupon to start with. And when you think about the mobile screen, the other interesting trade-off is the first few slots on the mobile screen become a lot more valuable because of the fact that it's got a very small real estate screen size, right? So the other trade-off is if you are an advertiser or a marketer sending coupons, where in those X slots would you want to rank yourself, right? So would you, is there an incentive for you to get ranked higher so more people click and redeem your coupons as opposed to being ranked lower, because not many people will actually scroll down all the way. So there are these two trade-offs. We run in a bunch of different control groups by hiding the location information, hiding the distance information, revealing it in some cases, and so on and so forth. So that's really where we are. To conclude, essentially we've done one set of experiments looking at simply the interaction between web and mobile in terms of people's propensity to click on ads and buy the product. The other thing we have done now is looking at redemption rates on mobile coupons. And think about this, like mobile really is sort of the glue between the digital world and the offline world. When we are often in stores, we have the smartphones on. And so if the stores can target you with coupons, appropriately priced coupons, you might see higher sales. So I believe that's all I had.
Thank you, Anindya. Next, we have Bryan Bollinger, who's going to talk about how commercials impact viewership of content.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ellie and Peter and Eric, for inviting me to talk at this. As you can see, the title is called Sitting Through Commercials, How Commercial Break Timing and Duration Affect Viewership. The main idea behind this is that when you change the presence of commercials within a TV program or how often they are shown, you're actually going to be changing the amount of switching away from the TV program and the amount of people who actually view the ad. So watching today, I've noticed people trickle in and out a little bit, nature calls, what have you. You're more likely to leave if you know it's a long panel. So this is a longer, I think the longest panel of the day, so if you need to go ahead. And that's essentially what I want to look at. Now, we don't have an actual experiment that we ran. We have a great natural experiment. So we want to see what happens when you remove commercials from programs. And if you try to do an A/B test on this, you're doing it by yourself. You can see what happens if you stop putting commercials in your programming. You can't see what happens if everyone stops putting commercials in their programming. Fortunately, the Chinese government has a lot more clout than I have, and they came around in January 2012, and they banned all within-program commercials for serial programs. So news and reality shows, they weren't affected, but any series show, no more commercials in the program. And this, of course, would have ramifications on the rate at which people continue to watch the shows, the people who might begin watching the shows, and of course then switching behavior between shows during those commercial breaks as well. I know I'm one of, I think, 2 people really talking about TV today. I think Andy mentioned that TV still is king. So budget for television advertising, this is a little old data, I apologize. It's from 2011, but you see the increase in television advertising there. But as this growth in TV advertising has occurred, TV viewership has sort of leveled off. I was talking to someone, a senior executive at HBO, who said viewership's really leveled off. He thinks it's on the downward trend. And part of the issue is that you have other options. People are more likely to have DVRs. People are more likely to be using internet or streaming video online. And those platforms actually have their own presence of commercials which differ from traditional television. Usually you watch very short commercials during an online streaming. You can pay for premium content such as HBO where you don't have a commercial break. So, and then over time, as you can see from this graph from 2011, this is the change from 2011 to 2010 to 2011, and basic scheduled broadcast TV, you do have a decline in viewership, whereas you have an increase in recorded TV, DVD, online streaming, and everything else. So while it may be a little harsh to say that these other options are attacking traditional TV, it is something that is of great concern to many people. So that's why we're trying to study this question. So as I mentioned, we had a great natural experiment in China. Commercial bans began for within serial commercials, a series or serial as they call it. We have minute by minute ratings data for every channel that's shown. So every minute I know what the viewership is. So we're going to include a dynamic model of channel viewing along with this natural experiment to try to figure out what people are actually doing in their viewing behavior. And on top of that, we got some price data to see what actually happened to the equilibrium prices for the different commercial slots after the ban went into effect. So to give you an idea of what you would expect to happen, this is a graph of a TV show before and after the treatment. So before the trial, you get these little red commercial breaks. Those are the within program commercial breaks. And then you have a between show commercial break too, which is that blue checkered area. Now after the ban, the within show commercial breaks disappear. You also have an extension of the length of the commercial breaks between programs as well, because the shows are the same length as they were going to be to begin with. So that's what happens because of the ban. And this is just an example of what we see in the ratings data. So you can see the high ratings in the pre-treatment in the blue line, and then there's a commercial break, and there's a dip in ratings during that within show commercial break. And then ratings go back up again, of course. People finish watching the show after they still channel surfing or whatever they wanted to do during the break, get a couple of cookies, glass of milk. And then at the end of the show, a lot of people drop off. Just like at the end of this session, I expect a lot of you to leave the room and go get more coffee. So after the ban, you don't have that option in the middle to go do what you want to do. You don't have the option to channel surf. So you see no one leaving the program in that red line. And then there's actually a much bigger drop off of people leaving the program in the between show commercial breaks. So that's what the data sort of look like. And the basic idea of our model is that we want to model minute by minute viewership as a function of the past viewership, which is why it's a dynamic model. And then the coefficient on your past viewership is essentially the thing that determines how many people stay with your programming. This is a graph of just the 15 serial programs. You can see there are some trends we need to make sure we control for. But when you have this commercial ban go into effect, you do see an increase of viewership of those 15 serials, which were being shown both before and after. One problem with the January timing is there were serials which ended around the holidays and new ones that began. So if we're just looking at the serials, we are constrained to those 15. As far as the aggregate effect on ratings goes, you can see there's a slight increase in the aggregate ratings for serials after the ban. A slight increase for the non-serials as well. It's not as high. And then, of course, a big drop actually in the ratings for people who are actually viewing the commercials once more of the commercial break is being switched from within program to post-program. This is the model. Only equation I'm going to show. It's a little bit of a lie, but only equation I'm going to show. The alpha is the thing that we really care about. Alpha determines the number of people who stay with your program. So we're actually going to allow alpha to depend on multiple different things. Show genre, whether there's a commercial ban or not, whether you are currently in a commercial break, all those types of things. And alpha is essentially the fraction of people who stay with your program from minute to minute. And we're going to have more complex specifications for that alpha as we move the model from just looking at serials to looking at channel level switching to then finally a full system which accounts not only for people leaving your program, but people coming in from other programs as well. And then the X are a whole bunch of explanatory variables to control for indicators for the type of show, quality of show, genre, channel dummies, you name it, we put it in there. There is a difference when you include controls for the channel which stay on during the whole show and when you include controls which are only equal to 1 when the show starts. The idea is that if you include a control which is equal to 1 for the entire length of the show, that's capturing the effect of all your loyal viewers. Whereas if you have controls for just the start of the show, the alpha term you estimate is the average viewer, not just the people who are likely to switch, but the people who are staying with the program the whole time anyway. So this is what happens when we look at the marginal viewers. So we have dummy variables for every single show, and they're turned on the entire time. So if you think about 2 segments of people, one half just never switch away from the show. They love that show. Those are going to be captured in the controls. And then you have the other group, they might like the show, but there's a high probability they're going to switch. And that's what these customers are. These are those marginal consumers, and you can see 96.9% of those consumers still, or viewers still stay with the program, these serial programs, during the show. This is not during commercial break. And of course, it depends on the genre. All those other alpha terms are just things that vary by genre. People are more likely to change a channel if you're romance. When you're romance, you get that nice negative coefficient. Romances just don't hold you to the channel. Turns out ancient costume is the thing that really, really engages people's interests. So I guess they're more loyal. And then this gamma term, that's the rate of switching when you're in a commercial break. So this is for within series commercial break. So this is pre-ban. You get 14% more people switching away from your channel when you're in a commercial break, which should make fairly intuitive sense. And that's a minute-by-minute basis. If you look at all viewers, so in this case, we have controls only for the start of each of the different programs. Each program has their own control. So essentially, we are capturing not just the people who are likely to switch, but all people. You can see almost everyone stays with the channel during the series show. And you do get variation still by genre. And the rate of switching, regardless of whether you're looking at the marginal viewer or the average viewer, is still about 14% or 14% higher when you're during the within show commercial break. So that's just the 15 serials that were present before and after the ban. We want to really be able to look at what happens between the shows as well. So the next set of analyses are going to be looking at the channel level. So what's different in the model is that alpha term, which was so simple before, now has tons of different stuff. These are the things that are included. The show genre, as it was before, whether the show's in a commercial break, whether the channel's in a commercial break that's between the show, the nature of the show before, the nature of the show after, whether they were series that were subject to the ban or not, the show types, and then, of course, whether we are in the post-ban period, because we're trying to see what's the effect, of course, of the removal of commercial breaks on the rate of switching, not just during commercials, but also during the show itself. We find that the base switching rate is, or 98.4% is the number of people who stay with your channel minute by minute, so it's a 1.6 switching rate. But that's much lower, actually, if the next show is a serial. So, and for commercial, so I put that out of order. So if the next show is a series show, that series show becomes much more attractive because it no longer has commercial breaks. People are much more likely to stay on the channel. Switching during the within show commercials is larger for non-serials, as we expect. These, again, are news and reality TV and things like that. Channel switching is the largest during the first minute of the commercial break. Again, that's not a big surprise. And then it drops off after, and the between show commercials exhibit much higher switching rates than the within program commercial breaks, which is why in that aggregate effect you see a total average drop in ratings for the commercials when the within show commercials are banned. As far as the effect of the ban goes, switching increases because of the ban for either type of show, it turns out. Switching during the within show commercial breaks declines for those non-serial shows. And throughout the between show break, viewers are actually less likely to switch channels during this time. So there's more lock-in of viewers because of the ban. And then finally, and this makes intuitive sense too, switching is higher if the last show is a serial. You just sat through a whole program, you had no commercial breaks, you didn't have a chance to go grab your beer. So you're more likely to change the channel or turn off your TV if you had no commercial breaks in that thing you just watched. If you had commercial breaks, you were less likely to switch away. And the opposite holds true if the next show is a serial. So you're more likely to stay with the channel again if the next one has no commercials. One question is, do people even begin watching these shows? You know, I know if I'm going to turn on my TV, if I'm going to watch a series show, I don't have to sit through commercials. It's like HBO for free. So you would think that people are more likely to actually watch these shows, and that's actually what we show here. The dotted line is the ban. The second point in week 3, that's right at the holidays, so take that one with a grain of salt. But you can see from the first point to the last point, and these are our time fixed effects. We essentially interact weekly fixed effects with whether the show is a series and therefore subject to the commercial ban or whether it's not. So this is controlling for all those dynamics and the other things what's remaining. And you can see that people are much more likely to begin watching the shows which are series and are subject to the ban after after that ban occurs, and they drop for the non-series shows because those are the ones that still have commercials, and there's essentially more attractive content now in the form of those series shows. Now, everything I talked about right now is really only modeling people leaving your channel, right? It's my rating this minute is a function of my rating in the last minute. How many people can I hold to my channel? It ignores switching to the channel from other channels. And that's what our full model actually includes. So this is why I lied. There's actually the second equation. It's the same thing, right? Why your rating today is a function of your rating yesterday, as determined by that alpha. That alpha still has all those terms, you know, whether it's subject to the ban, whether the ban's occurred, whether it's the first minute of the commercial break, things like that. But in addition, it's also a function of the people who have left the other channels. That second term, Y negative C, is just the other channel. So for all other channels, we allow the loss of their viewers to come to your channel as determined by that capital delta term. And delta we allow to be a function of whether the other channel is showing shows of the same genre, whether it's actually near your channel numerically, which turns out to be really important actually, and things like that. Of course, whether it's in commercial break. So that's the full model. The results came in last night, so just in time. To sort of sum up some of these results, viewers are much more likely to switch from other channels to yours, again, if they are in commercial, not surprisingly. If they have nearby numbers, so the channels which are within 2 or 3 channels of yours, those viewers are likely to come to yours. So if they're in commercial breaks, that's a good thing for you. And of course, if they show a show of the same genre as well. And one of the things that we can do is not just find these effects, but quantify the effects. I didn't show all the numbers up here because you can't read them, I know, in the back. So these are the flavor of the results. The paper will have the actual numerical quantification of the results if you are interested. And on average, due to the ban, and this model is doing it channel by channel, allowing for interactions, we find that switching during the non-series within show commercials actually declines as well. So the people who are willing to watch the reality TV and the news, who actually begin watching those shows, they switch less because of the ban as well. So you essentially have a self-selection of people who are going to watch that type of programming. Switching during commercial breaks between the non-serials actually declines, and the commercial breaks between the serials actually, they don't exhibit a significant effect. Now overall, what's the effect on the price of these advertising spots? You would expect there to be a difference in price because now we have a lot less within show commercials, which were more attractive originally because people were less likely to switch away, and you have more commercials between shows. Now what we find after the ban is that price goes up for a within within a non-TV series ad break. So the commercial break during a program, which is not a series show, so it's not subject to the ban, that goes up by 21% on average. Of course, prices of all of these actually increase. So with the relative increase is what we care about. If you look at the between show commercial breaks, you also see price increases of around 20% if you're after a non-TV series before a non-TV series, or after a non-TV series before a TV series. So 20% increase essentially if you're in the commercial break before, if you are after a non-TV series. These are the ones who are still subject, who aren't subject to the ban, they still have commercials. Now if you look at the price increase for the between program commercial break, if you're following the TV series, and again, these are shows which are subject to the ban, they have no commercials, and because they have no commercials, they have held on to their viewers. People didn't have a chance to switch. The prices of these TV spots go up by about 30%, so much higher price increase, which again we would expect with these new price equilibriums that result from this law. So in conclusion, viewers are having many, many more ways to avoid commercials, and we should all care about that. In the US, it would be very tough to determine what the effect of changing the length or presence of a commercial break is, because you'd have to do it in experiment in isolation without everyone else doing it as well. Right now, the variation that could try to describe that is actually across platform or across types of content where you have really premium content versus non-premium content, or like I said, across platforms, traditional TV versus online. Because China gave us this great natural experiment, we could sort of combine the natural experiment with actual ratings data on a minute-by-minute basis on China to determine what is the real effect of this type of ban and the presence of commercials on viewership of not just the material that the channels are providing, but the commercials that you all are showing. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Brian. I think we saw three interesting uses of experiments. Nadia and Bernd convinced one company to run an experiment for them so they could answer their question. Anindya convinced a company to run an experiment, complemented that experiment with observational data for several companies to try and generalize the results. And Brian convinced the Chinese government to change a few rules so he could answer his research question as well. So I have several questions for you guys, and I'm sure many in the audience do as well. But before I switch gears and move to Q&A mode, I'd like to give 5 minutes to our discussant, Mr. Vaman Kudpi, to share his observations on these research studies as well.
Thank you. One thing that strikes me about all of the presentations up to now, today, is how widespread experimentation has become in industry. I'm originally from academia, and when I was in academia, experiments were almost solely in that arena and not so widespread in practice and in industry. It's really good news because, fundamentally, experimental evidence is clearly better in many, many ways. But at the same time, I don't necessarily see the role for other ways of making inferences and gaining insights diminishing too much either. There is a role for both, and modeling does have a place, really. A few things that I do worry about. One, how well is the experiment really being run? Many people are in earlier sessions and in this session have pointed out some of the practical difficulties with doing experiments, and we really should not be ignoring that. The good news, of course, is that it is in the interest of business to make sure that these experiments are run properly. It is not like a situation where you're forced by an external force to do experiments and provide proof. For example, in the pharmaceutical arena, it is in your self-interest that you do these experiments correctly. Another thing that strikes me about these developments is experiments are definitely much more within the reach of many more businesses. So I do expect to see an increase in the incidence of people resorting to experiments. It also has implications for research suppliers, I think. I see opportunities and some threats as well, depending on how you position yourself. The other general observation I want to make is the point that was raised by Professor Epstein earlier about long-term versus short-term effects, I think I did not hear too many people addressing that in an adequate fashion. I don't know if it is because of the inadequacies of the experimental approach. For that matter, whether there are, I know there are still inadequacies in the modeling approach on how to properly account for long-term effects. I would encourage people to think about how to address those concerns as well, because I know it is a difficult task to test for long-term effects in an appropriate way, but there is no doubt in my mind that they are important. Perhaps the solution lies in not focusing yourself on very short experiments, short duration experiments. Maybe there is some merit in continuing an experiment beyond the normal bounds that you normally put on experiments. Obviously, there are practical limitations to that. I was also encouraged to see that there is a lot of interest in traditional advertising as well. And one fertile area for future research clearly is incorporating offline media in all these experiments. I think there is a lot of potential for doing that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's turn to Q&A, and I'm going to kick things off, just ask a few questions, and then we'll turn it over to the audience. So my request is, of course, questions will be brief, the answers, let's keep it brief so we have more questions. So the first question I have is for Bernd and Nadia. You guys showed us that branded keywords do cannibalize clicks and conversions from organic keywords. And nonetheless, you found that it does add incremental revenues and profits. Now, I wanted to ask you whether what you shared in aggregate is true for all keywords, or whether there's some variation across keywords. Does it depend on the presence of an important competitor next to your organic listing? Things of that nature, if there are any differences across keywords.
Yes, there are differences across keywords. We have 24 of those. Of course, if you go down to individual keywords, the number of observations that you have is smaller. But we have differences. We have some keywords where we really have low cannibalization. Some of them have high cannibalization, and others even show the synergy scenario. However, the keywords that show synergies or high cannibalization are usually those keywords that get a few number of searches and clicks, and at the end of the day, conversions. That's why it's a bit hard to kind of generalize from these kinds of keywords. And probably it depends on the keyword, on the specific keyword that you're looking at and the number of searches only. But I'm sure if you look at a broader range of keywords, like generic ones, you could also have the case where you have the double entries, and there it becomes probably quite important where your competitor is in the ranking, where you are in the ranking, in paid and organic, what keyword exactly you're talking about. So I'm sure, ultimately it would be nice to have saying this scenario is going to happen if I have this kind of keyword. If I have another kind of keyword, I'll have another scenario. That would be, that would be quite nice. But of course, you'll have to have the data.
Okay, Bernd.
Let me add one aspect. First of all, it's clear that the farther away the two listings are, very likely the lower are the cannibalization effects. But one major result of our story is that essentially it's about the incremental value. So it's not about the cost per click and you take a silo view and just calculate what is the price that I pay for each click. No, you have to calculate the incremental click. So it's about the uplift modeling, about incremental modeling. That's essentially what we are proposing here.
Okay. Anindya, I remember you had a study a couple years back on the interaction between paid and organic search. Can you relate your findings to their findings and help us, connect the dots? Are these generalizable? Did you observe similar things?
Yeah, what we'd seen, we worked with a retailer that sold, furniture, bedding, and electronic appliances, that sort of stuff. And what we saw was that it is actually profitable to have paid search, even if your brand appears very high on the organic listing. In fact, there is this very positive complementarity effect. So we ran a field experiment again over there where we sort of turned off the paid ads for certain periods in time and kept it on. We couldn't turn off the organic listings for obvious reasons. But we did see that for those brands, for those keywords where the paid ads were actually on, even when the organic listings were present, they saw a significant increase in click-throughs, conversions, revenues, etc., compared to when the paid ads were on. And so we did find that it is, in fact, profitable for brands to have investments in sponsored search, even if your organic listing shows up pretty high up on Google.
Okay, thanks for that. Actually, let's turn to the study you shared today. You talked a little bit about the results, which is that showing ads in web and mobile helps lift click-through rates and conversion rates. Now, what might be the mechanism that's driving this? And in particular, what I was curious about was why might showing an ad once in web and mobile lift click-through rates and conversion rates over, say, showing the ad twice on web alone? So showing multiple times on web, why is that not as efficient as showing it half the times on web and half of that on mobile?
Yeah, so I mean, there's some theory from social psychology which basically goes to say that if people get exposed to the same ad on different channels, in this case different devices as well, that is likely to have a stronger reinforcement effect than seeing the same ad twice on the same channel. So you see the ad once on mobile, once on web. The fact that they are two different channels and you see them at different points in time, maybe even in different locations, that is going to have a stronger reinforcement effect than showing the same ad twice, the same user on the same channel. So essentially that's sort of the theory motivating the mechanism that we believe is driving this the same result. So it's sort of similar in flavor to, I guess, some of the earlier studies that have shown complementarity between search and display. Even though they're both on the internet, you see them on different forums. And I know David and Randall have a paper on that. So it has a similar flavor to that.
Okay. So both your studies were looking at synergies between different forms of online advertising. And obviously a big question is synergies between online and offline advertising. As Bryan said, TV is still the giant, and so there's a lot of money spent on TV advertising. And so question relates to whether there are any synergies between offline and online, what are the nature of those synergies, or whether we're really talking about a world where a lot of the offline dollars are just going to keep moving to the online world, as we have witnessed, say, with print. Because, Bryan, you had the study on TV, and I know you do a lot of work on offline advertising as well. I want to start by asking you if you had any thoughts or you've done any work looking at interplay between offline and online.
So I am actually currently working on another project with the support of the WCAI. So I'm looking over at Ellie right now, where we have a data set which has it's single consumer data, and we have purchases of the product, other products in the same category, as well as Facebook exposures, online exposures, and TV exposures. And there we don't have experimental data, so there's a little more work in trying to do the exposure level model to make sure that we're really getting causality there. But we are finding at this stage positive interaction effects between, in particular, TV and the non-TV channels, both online and Facebook exposures. So that will be presented at a conference, I think, coming up in August. So I'm sure Ellie will be sending emails about. Oh, sorry, never mind.
And is that experimental data or is that observation?
So that's not experimental data. So again, one of the challenges, and it's come up multiple times today, is making sure that what we're pulling out is really this causal interaction effect, and it's not some spurious thing caused by the fact that you might advertise across multiple channels in periods of high expected demand. So the extra work has been trying to ensure that we really are pulling out the causality piece.
Okay. One last question before we open it up. All of you actually ran dynamic experiments. You're running your experiments over several weeks. One natural question which Vaman brought up is about short-term versus long-term effects. Another issue that's related is an issue of spillovers from one period to the other. So for example, with sponsored search, if you turn on for 2 weeks, then you turn it off for 2 weeks, the impact of ads from the first 2 weeks can spill over into purchases in the next weeks, and similar effects can arise with the web, mobile, and other experiments. Any comments on how you think about these issues, and in particular, the extent to which it confounds some of your results?
Well, first of all, I mean, running the experiments is complicated, and you quickly get to rather small numbers. So if we think about long-term effects, we would have to measure something like repurchase rates of customers. If you first think about, we first have the impression, then we get a click, so that's a probability. From the click to the conversion, that's another probability, and then from the conversion to the repurchasing behavior, that's another probability. So you quickly end up with small numbers. So that's certainly a challenge. Still, the question is whether we should stop here or whether we should move on. And I think over the last couple of years, the size of the experiments just grew up tremendously. So I think we can better deal with that problem, that the numbers are fairly small. So that would be one way to solve it. Secondly, on the spillover effects, yes, of course, there could be spillover effects. I would say if we are 2 weeks in terms of time, I would say there should not be too much noise in the experiments. So I feel, at least in our case, reasonably positive, and that the kind of product that we looked at, I would assume there are very little spillover effect. So you either purchase it immediately or you don't purchase it.
So are you advertising throughout those 2 weeks, or you wait for 2 weeks for stuff to happen, and then you go to the next period?
Yeah, we go for 2 weeks, we stop it for 2 weeks, and we
so
start
you're
again.
advertising throughout the 2 weeks?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
It's a good question. And one thing we saw with the field experiment with digital books is 92% of the purchases, or in this case downloads, happen within 2 days of the person clicking on that ad. So at least in the case of electronic ebooks, it doesn't seem like there are these long-term effects of advertising. One of the things that we plan to do with our 1-year panel data that has this massive observational data set is actually look at long-term versus short-term. We can't do that with the experimental piece because it's only 6 weeks and it's only one product, but with the archival data, we've got 7 different categories and 1 year of data. There we can actually study that, and we're working on some of these questions, teasing out short-term versus long-term. It's an incredibly difficult problem, to be honest, but we are trying.
Okay, I think this is a good time to take 5 minutes for people to discuss amongst yourselves, and then Ellie is going to moderate the rest of this session in terms of the Q&A.
So, have we all come? Are there questions? Questions for the panelists? Who wants to? Jim. Sorry, I know some of your names. So, Jim in the white shirt over here.
Hi, this is for Nadia. I was wondering, you talked a little bit about some of the breakdowns that you tried to look at. So we've started to experiment with turning off our branded search campaign. And my Google rep is in the room somewhere, so, but he knows this. But part of what I was wondering, because this is where we're kind of going to next with this, is did you look at whether or not things like misspellings or some of the pieces of the branded campaign that aren't the exact names maybe perform differently, or you saw different lift or cannibalization metrics on those?
No, actually no, but that's a quite good idea. Our branded keywords were, no misspellings in there. But that would be actually a good idea to look at.
Good. Next question. David, in the green shirt in the back. A mic is on its way.
So we saw two more experiments that were using random changing treatment by over time, right? Instead of having the luxury of being able to randomize to the individual, we're switching on and off by time, which is the most feasible thing to do most of the time. Could both of you talk a little bit about what was the time scale on which you left things on and off, and what were the practical reasons for the time scales that you chose, and have you thought about what this means for your results?
Okay. So I can start.
Yeah, okay.
So from the archival data, what we had seen is what I mentioned before, that for ebooks, 92% of the purchases happen within 2 days of the people clicking on these ads. So for our randomized experiment, we took a 3-day window for each of these sessions where we were turning off ads and turning on ads in one channel versus the other. So that was the primary motivation for choosing that window size. And then we replicated that over a 6-week period just to see that this is not some isolated effect we are picking up from these 10 or 20 books. And so we replicated that over a 6-week period, pulsating those books between web only, mobile only, web and mobile, and none of the ads. I think that's probably goes to answer your question, David. Yeah, because, right. I just, again, like this goes back partly to Kartik's question also, and also I think what David asked before about the short term versus long term. So, because if you keep it too long, then you might have to worry about the effect spilling over to the following week versus, actually trying to measure the same week or the same cohort effect. So.
Also, you want as many different observations as you can. Like, if
Right.
you just had it turned on and then off, you might worry that there's other stuff going on
Yeah,
that's
right.
correlated in time. So if you can
Right.
pulse it a bunch of times, you're
Right,
in
exactly.
better shape.
Yeah, I think that was essentially the same idea we had. I think you had 6 times 1 week, we had 6 times 2 weeks turning on and off. The alternative, what we could do today, is that we focus on particular regions where we turn on and off the ads. But that would certainly be an alternative today.
So I actually have a question for the audience. Raise your hand if you're working at a company that's doing experiments. Okay, so almost most of the room, that's great. But I have sort of 3 other follow-up questions. How many of you are splitting based on individuals, like David was doing in his experiment? See hands? Okay. How many are splitting based on geographies? So they'll run the ads in one geography and not another. So you got a fair amount, like that's more. You guys can't see, but twice as many people raise their hands for geographies. How about time scale? I turn it off, on in my entire market. So that's closer back, this lower number, closer to where we were with the individuals. That's, anyway, useful. I wanted to know. Who else has a question?
Mine is perhaps a little more generic, more broader, but Kirk from Baylor. But as I hear these across the day, and then particularly with respect to the different mediums, and as I come into Rajiv right here, it seems like in some ways many of the things that we taught in advertising 20 years ago are still the same. And I'm wondering to what extent this crosses your minds as you see this and you go, isn't this the same as multiple channels reinforced from things we've known before, just now the medium has changed? So what's different about digital versus multiple channels 20 years ago?
Brian, do you want to start with that one? Or you can pass it off to someone else if you like.
I'm going to pass this to Anindya because he was looking at mobile, and I think the unique thing about mobile and why I thought that study so interesting is the ability to do close geographic targeting when you were actually nearby. You have these fences where if you walk within a certain radius of a store, you can get pushed promotional activity and stuff like that. So the geographic targeting, I think, is one of the neat things. So I'll force Anindya to it.
I can. All right. So, I guess sort of in short, the answer to your question is probably ease in measurement, because as now you've heard over and over again, this old quote by Wanamaker about half my budget is wasted, I don't know which half. In digital, it's a lot relatively easier to measure that effect. That being said, again, there's some literature that has shown that seeing the same ad twice may not necessarily lead to a positive complementarity or synergistic effect. So two friends of mine, Avi Goldfarb and Catherine Tucker, they have shown that offline and online can be substitutes. So seeing the ad on a billboard when you're driving and then seeing the ad on the internet can actually reduce your purchase propensity. So at least for us, for me and my colleagues, the motivation was there is some evidence that seeing the same ad twice on different channels may be having a negative effect on your purchase propensity. Well, at least we haven't seen anything with web and mobile, and so that motivated us to look at this particular context.
Yeah, maybe let me add one thing that Andy mentioned this morning as well. Before we had the internet, essentially, let's say if you saw TV, if you saw a TV ad, I mean, you had no motivation to hear more radio to hear the ad again. But what's happening today? You see it on the TV, you hook up to the internet, you search for more information there. For example, using Google search, you get the ad, you react, and I think that's something new we haven't seen before. The latency, and also that it changes the behavior in the different channels. So I mean, because I see the TV ad, I go to whatever kind of search engine, I search there, I click on the ads there. I mean, that's something different compared to TV and radio or newspaper before.
Yeah, and to add to that, unlike in the old days, not all of your advertising media are completely under your control. Take social media. You can both invest in it, so it is an independent variable in some sense, but it's also a dependent variable. So the relationships between the channels and the outcomes because of what happens in those channels are more complicated today.
We have a question here in the front. No, it's coming. After lunch, they're slower.
Yeah. How generalizable all those things, especially in terms of different brands? It always was very big confusion to me. Thousands, tens of thousands, millions maybe of brands. So you found something, for example, for books. Could I say now, for my own kind of purposes, oh, okay, it's found that media combination brings certain effect, which is valid for any electronic books, kind of things. In other words, what is the variation between different particular brands in findings, which actually, I guess this question is applied to any of you. And also, nobody paid attention usually to the quality of the advertising, or even to the intention of the advertising. Either it is about pricing, for instance, it's a big, big issue, or it's about just branding, like, oh, this is Coca-Cola. So I didn't hear that kind of distinction in all those studies, which are all very interesting, but how you would address at least those two issues? Thank you.
So there are two parts to your question, and I'll start with the first one. Yes, the experiment we did was on ebooks, but the archival data where we also showed the same results had 7 different categories, such as travel, apparel, shoes, cosmetics, telecommunications, et cetera, et cetera. So we found the same consistent directional results in terms of these two channels acting as complements for the web, and there's a small dip in conversions on mobile, but overall revenues get higher.
My question was about how it was different for each particular book name within the book family.
Oh yeah, no, sure. So we have the data. We can always look at genre-specific effects. Are we seeing stronger effects for business books versus scientific books versus fiction versus non-fiction? What we see is the direction, again, remains the same. So there's some difference in the quantified effects, but there is no, at least we did in our study see any outlier product category or genre where the signs would flip. So I feel fairly confident in saying that what we see across these 6-7 categories of products seems pretty generalizable. The other question you had was also very interesting, which I haven't looked at yet, but we could, which is looking at the effect of different kinds of ads. In our studies, the ads were all the same. They're all display ads meant to increase awareness. They did not have information about price discounts, for example. It was purely an ad meant to educate the customer about what the product is. But you raise a very interesting question that there's going to be potential differences in ad format and ad content. So you can have display ads saying 20% discount. It's somewhat related to the second follow-up study I mentioned on mobile marketing and coupons. Because with coupons, and this is actually a joint work with friends from Germany, Martin Spann, Dominik Molitor at LMU Munich. And they worked with a company called Gettings in Germany who helped us design an app and then change the kinds of coupons that are sent to people within the mobile phone. So the coupons can be about price discounts, or they can simply be about the product itself, saying that come to our store, you'll get a discount, and we don't tell you how much it is, but you will get something. So there we're getting to some of your question through that experiment, but I agree that this is a bigger question that requires more studies.
A question right here.
How you doing? Rob Campanile. I'm an executive director for Ernst & Young's Advanced Analytics Practice. My question is twofold. You mentioned channel consistency, and I didn't see the ebooks channel, but were there any root causes between the mobile and the web channel for just capability-wise that would be awareness-related on mobile and more transaction-related on web? And then the other question is around data security, because we find that a lot of the data security consumer issues come up on the mobile platform sometimes, and the web is more of a safer in-the-house type of place to conduct the transaction. So just thoughts on those root causes and any data you had.
So I can speak to the first question. The answer is the retailer, this particular vendor, they have the exact same design and layout on the internet versus the mobile optimized site. The only difference is the actual amount of information that shows up on a mobile screen is less than that of the internet for obvious reasons, so somebody has to scroll down more. The display ads were exactly the same in content or style or color, all of that. Again, we want to be careful that we're not picking up any differences in ads versus anything else. So it's fairly consistent. So that's why we feel comfortable saying that this is driven by the channel-specific consistencies. I don't have any data on the security issues yet, but it's a good question.
Go ahead in the back, and then up here in the front.
Okay, I have this question for Nadia. So my question is, when you did your experimental study, you switched off paid search for a certain time, and then they switched on paid search for a certain time, and then you measured. Then that's how you were able to measure how many cannibalized orders you got there, right? At a corporate level, you cannot keep switching on and off the paid search, right? You need to have a consistent method, like some kind of A/B test or something, so that you can measure. The idea is, you had a measurement for the whole paid search orders. You calculated how much of those orders were actually orders that came through cannibalization, right? So for an ongoing basis, how would you measure that? Is there some kind of method or an A/B test which you can apply more practically?
So I think the question is, do you do the test once, take that learning away, and do what it suggests for the rest of time, or? Okay.
Well, first of all, experimentation is expensive. Maybe not so much in terms of the cost of running, but in terms of the opportunity cost. Because, for example, in our case, it turned out that the branded keyword turned out to be profitable. So if we don't advertise for 3 times 2 weeks, that's a loss in profit. And of course, if I continuously do that throughout the year, then I'm going to lose a lot of money. So I don't see any reason to continuously
test experimentally always the same. Once I found a rather stable result, I would go for the more profitable action, and then I might want to move on for the next topic where I don't have a good answer for. But once I found a solution, I think it's robust. I don't think there's a need to continue to do the experimentation because it's costly.
There's a lot of expertise on this in the audience. So of those of you who, well, it's all of you who are doing experiments, how many of you repeat tests over time? So a fair number of people are repeating the tests later on so
yeah,
these folks in the audience are actually finding that it is worth the investment to do it again. And how long typically? A year later? 2 years later? 2 or 3 years, people are nodding, somewhere in there? A week later? Not so much? So something like that. We had a question up here.
Hi, this is Shiv from Odometry. I have a question for Anindya. So, did you limit your study to users that have access to a mobile device that can view the ads or browsing the web, or are you assuming everybody has access in your study?
No, we were pretty careful about that. So it was only limited to people who had both devices. And in fact, we can also identify if it's a smartphone versus a tablet versus a PC. So we can identify, so I use the word mobile broadly, but we can actually separate that between smartphone and tablet. In this case, it's, what makes it feasible also is the fact that most people sign in, when they have to download or buy a product. In separate contexts, if you're trying to identify the same user's journey across smartphone, tablet, and PC, etc., it's a hugely, it's a big non-trivial issue. It takes a humongous amount of effort to actually, identify, because cookies, mobile has a variety of problems. It's very measurable, but you can't identify users that easily, except unless you use the MSISDN number and the EMEI number. Cookies don't work quite often. First-party cookies, third-party cookies are turned off by default. So that's a very complicated separation. In this case, because we are working with the vendor or the company that requires you to sign in, we could. But there are some companies in the US like Drawbridge, which are actually working on identifying the same users' paths across PC, smartphone, tablet, and laptop. They use something called a triangulation method.
So even for those users that you track them on the desktop, but they never came back through the mobile device, whether they have access or not.
Yeah, because as long as they have used it once, or if they've signed in once using the smartphone, we know they have access to it.
Any more questions? So I think that'll be our last question, because Bryan tells me viewership trails off at the end, so this will be our last question.
I just wanted to follow up on that question. So in the past, I attempted to do a mobile and, maybe I should stand. Sorry, I'm Randall again. Sorry to speak too much. But in the past, I tried to do a mobile and web interaction study. And the big problem that I ran into is that even though we could identify the users on mobile and web based on logged in IDs, we could never get enough people to see both ads during the relevant time period. So what fraction of people are seeing just web ads, just mobile ads, and then both? And how did you account for that in that research?
Yeah, so for example, we know if you're clicking on the ad on the mobile device, right? So that click in the log file gets registered as a click through the mobile ad. Similarly for the PC ad, we know the timestamps when they're clicking on the ad on the PC versus the mobile ad. So techniques we use to put it together is the combination of the timestamps and the channel-specific information on which ad you're clicking at what point in time.
So my question's more, so in all of the research that we do where we can identify a user, we are never guaranteed whether or not they even show up. So yes, we know their identifier. Generally, only about 60% of the people showed up over 2 weeks, and so they would see a display ad. Then on the mobile devices, there's probably only a 50% chance that we ever got an opportunity to serve them an ad, and as a result, then our sample size then basically shows up as something like 50% of people see mobile, 50% of people see web, and only 25% or fewer are seeing both.
Right. Right,
Does that make more sense?
Yeah. No, absolutely. So the data was pretty big. The actual experimental data set had 26 million transaction records, starting from search to click to. So with that big a sample, you'd get enough. Like, this is going back to the talk you guys had in the morning, in terms of statistical power. With that big a sample, you'll get enough power in your tests to, even though only 50% might be showing up on mobile, it's still a big enough sample for you to make these
So you
comparisons.
start with 26 million customers.
26 million transaction records from, I don't have the exact number off the top of my head of actual unique customers, but this is basically, this is the largest seller of books in South Korea, so of ebooks in South Korea. So this is, well over several 100,000 unique customers that they have on their site.
Okay, great, thank you.
Fantastic. So thank you very much all for joining the panel. It's kind of funny. So we've been spending the whole day talking about conversions and sales and advertising exposures, like, that the ultimate thing in measuring advertising is the conversion or the sale. And I just want to make sure you all stick around for the last panel, because we're going to shift gears and talk about other outcomes that we can observe for advertising. So we'll take a half an hour break here, and then we'll be back at 4 o'clock to find about new measurement methods for advertising.